What's up, y'all, and welcome to Over 40 with a Shawty. This is the podcast where we get to celebrate fierce and fabulous women who are stepping into motherhood a little later in life. I'm your girl, Tovan, and it's my pleasure to bring you real talk, real stories, and all the support you need as we navigate these DMs, these diapers, and these deadlines. Grab your tea, your coffee, or your tequila, no judgment, and let's go. What's up, y'all, and welcome back to Over 40 with a Shorty. Excuse me, I am under the weather because when you have a shorty who goes to daycare, you are sick every other week. So I apologize. I'm congested, but we're going to make it through this episode. Welcome back to episode 3. Today, we're going to be diving into a topic that's making waves. It's the topic of egg freezing. Whether you're considering it, curious about it, or just here to hear some incredible stories, this episode is for you. So let's talk about egg freezing. First thing first, what is it? Egg freezing is really a process where women's eggs are retrieved, they're frozen, and they're stored for potential use later. It was successfully used back in the 1980s, but it didn't really pick up steam until early 2000s. In fact, it was considered experimental by the American Society of Reproductive Medicine until about 2012. Sorry, guys. Since then, it's become pretty common option for women, I would say, for women who are interested in preserving fertility. So why this big surge in popularity? I think for many women, life hasn't always lined up with our biology, right? Women are working, building careers, pursuing education, and have their own personal goals. Or maybe they're just waiting for the right partner. Any of these things can really push your timeline for starting a family. So egg freezing really offers a way for people to hit maybe pause on the biological clock to keep the option of becoming a mom open. Today, I'm joined by 2 amazing women who've been through their own journeys with this procedure, and they're here to share their stories, the highs and the lows and everything in between. Without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce my 2 guests. The first is Sophia McCullum, a dynamic HR leader hailing from Detroit, Michigan. She has over 13 years of experience in strategic HR initiatives across industries like the automotive industry, nonprofit, and aerospace. Sophia is no stranger to navigating high-stakes situations. Beyond her career success, she's a fierce advocate for personal growth, driven by her personal mantra, the best things in life are on the other side of fear. Sophia is here to share her journey of facing tough choices in fertility and what it means to redefine her path forward. And joining her is Dr. Adrianne Robertson, an assistant professor at Rowan University and a mental health advocate with a mission to decrease stigma around counseling in Black communities. With a BA in psychology, a master's in education, and a newly minted PhD, Adrianne's journey has been nothing short of inspiring. Balancing a move to Atlanta, surviving changes in the pandemic, and the complexity of a dissertation, she now teaches master's students while running her own private telehealth practice. Today, she shares her experience with egg freezing, mental health, and the emotional challenges tied to the dream of motherhood. These powerhouse women are here to get vulnerable, to keep it real, to drop some gems about making these life-altering decisions. All right, well, welcome to the show, Adrianne and Sophia. I'm going to ask these ladies to just do a quick, I know we did their bio, but do a quick introduction. Tell us a little something about them that we didn't hear in their bio, and then we'll just dig right into the conversation.
All right. Well, thank you, first of all, for having me here. I think this is a important topic that we're going to be chatting about. But yeah, so I'm Dr. Adrianne Robertson. I'm a professor. I have a crazy dog who better not come in on this podcast. But yeah, I'm 40 years old, and I'm also a mental health counselor. I'm really passionate about mental health, particularly in kids and minoritized populations. And um, I love long walks on the beach and red wine.
I love it. I love
That's what I
it.
always say.
So Adrianne is also my cousin, and I'm super excited to have her on the podcast. And speaking of mental health, I talked a little bit about my own struggles with mental health going through my pregnancy, but specifically last episode, I talked about my cousin Dom and the loss of my favorite cousin in the whole world. No offense to my cousin Adrianne, I love her as well. But I will just tell you that she was a godsend. She just jumped right in and checked on me constantly through that process, and more importantly, just showed up when we needed her the most. These ladies are part of that tribe, and so it's special to have them on the podcast. And I would just be remiss not to take the time to tell them how grateful I am, and specifically Adrianne, for all that you did during that time of grief for me. I appreciate that. So, Sophia, tell us a little bit about yourself, ma'am.
All right. Sophia McCullum. I think just like Adrianne that this topic is such a great one, and I wish that I knew more about this topic in my earlier years, in my 20s, likely, than rather than my late 30s, and or I wish the ladies and the women in my community knew more about this topic. So I am also passionate about this, and I think that younger women should be more educated and more equipped around their fertility. But I'm based here in Atlanta. I have an amazing cat named King, who is my little pride and joy. I love my baby. Um, Happy to be here talking about this topic. I'd say maybe one thing that's not in my bio is I truly believe the best things in life are on the other side of fear. So I try to live my life that way, and I'm happy to be here and talk about this topic. And thanks, Toban, for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you for being here. What's special about Sophia as well is that she's from Detroit, y'all. And
That's
honey,
right. We're
the
proud.
Detroit comes out and I love it. She absolutely is always a person who I can call on and talk about anything. And when she says fearless, she is fearless. I've seen her in action and I can appreciate her approach to life. So let's jump into this very interesting and yet hard topic. I would love to understand a little bit about how you even learned about egg freezing in general.
Yeah, I'll kick it off. My mom. I think my mom introduced the topic to me. She's just seen it on TV, saw it on the news where women in their, call it their 20s or late 20s, were freezing eggs. And she would mention it to me because she was just nervous. I wasn't married. She knew I wanted to be married prior to having children. Still not married today. And so she was saying, hey, you need to freeze your eggs. And, so I did dabble in the idea around the age of 27 just because of that information from my mom. So that's kind of how I was introduced very early on.
Yeah. And did you tell us how old you were, Sophia?
I'm 37, guys. 37.
God.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. So you're so at 27 you started to hear about this conversation from your mom, but then you actually did not pursue egg
Until I was
retrieval
36.
until you were 36.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and how about you, Adrian? When did you first learn about egg
I was
retrieval?
actually the same. I was 35 when I did it. And honestly, I don't remember exactly how I heard about it. I had a friend group and we were all single and struggling in the dating world. And it was just kind of like we still wanted to preserve the opportunity. So just conversations that came up. But then I actually had a couple coworkers males whose wives they did in vitro. And so one of them recommended the doctor, and then the other one told me how good our insurance was. And so I started reaching out and asking questions, and thought, okay, well, I initially was doing it, and then I had a tragedy. A cousin on my mother's side passed away, so I had to actually put it off for a few months. I don't. The doctor said it really didn't make a difference because at the time I was 34, and I ended up doing it when I turned 35 because of the timing. What I will say, really, just also thinking about it, I'm not sure how it was for you, Sophia, when you went through the process, but I also just want to acknowledge that a lot of people have
Yeah.
fertility issues. I have friends who actually ended up going to the same doctor I did after I froze my eggs. She was trying to have a baby, and her husband had issues. So recognizing how packed the office was every day, I was like, wow, like so many women have issues, and so many people's insurances don't cover, or
Yes.
they only cover limitations.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I just think it's really important to acknowledge that women of all ages and races have issues.
Yeah,
with fertility.
I think you're spot on, Adrienne. I think until you dive in it, you don't understand that. And not only do women get into it just because of having maybe issues, but now because it's readily available to some,
Mm-hmm.
um, I would say women are also using it as a planning mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And really that's how I really got into it at the age of 36. So I found out from my gynecologist. I went again, just fear from family, fear from societal norms that I'm 36. I don't have any kids, etc. So I wanted to check fertility. And at that time, they did a vaginal ultrasound, and
Mm-hmm.
they found that I had a huge fibroid that wasn't there a year prior. And then they tested my hormones via my blood, and they recognized that for a woman at 36, I did not have the quantity, not quality, but the quantity of eggs in my egg reserve. And so one thing I learned is that a woman is born with all the eggs she ever will have in life. So when you're born with all of them. And so at a woman my age, they were too few. And so it
Mm-hmm.
was, hey, two things needs to happen. One, you have to get this large fibroid removed. But
Mm-hmm.
before we cut on your uterus, you need to go freeze your eggs. And
Yes. Yeah.
so I had a fellow sorority sister that also had been through it a number of times, who was really a support for me. And that's really what propelled me, is that fibroid, to go and get my eggs frozen.
I actually have PCOS, so always knew. And for many people don't really understand or know what PCOS is. So I was actually diagnosed around 20. And so that was almost 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember being 20 in college, and they're like, you're probably not going to be able to have kids. Because again, back then, they didn't really know enough about it. So I remember being 20 and being devastated, because
Yeah,
I'll be honest, I always wanted to be a mom.
that's
I
right.
saw myself as a mom, but then as I got older and I learned more, they just said it might be, my gynecologist told me it just might be a little bit harder and I may have to take some like fertility medication, but that women with PCOS have kids, can have kids. But I think that's another added layer that we also don't think about is
Yep.
we if we don't know, if we're not trying to actively have kids, we don't know if something's wrong unless like a fibroid is really painful or PCOS with cysts on your ovaries. So it is a I think the other part is how many women just don't know. Like it's
That's
a
it.
they don't know what's going on. And it's because they're not actively trying.
Yep, I agree.
I think that's such a fair point and observation, that many of us don't know what's going on with our reproductive health because, I mean, even if you're going to get your annual exams,
Mm-hmm.
which, now if you've had no issues with your annual exams, you can go 3 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can go periods of time where you're just not aware of any issues happening because you're not getting these exams. And even that doesn't necessarily always result in someone uncovering
Hmm.
reproductive
Yep.
health issues. So unless you're intentional about asking questions and proactively advocating for yourself in those spaces, it is hard to
Yeah,
know what healthy reproductive systems look like or
that's
if you
right.
have one, right? And so I think
Hmm.
it's such a good point that you both make around discovering these things. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
happy that they were discovered,
Yeah.
and that one a doctor at some point in time gave you some options, because how many doctors would just, to your point, Adrian, dismiss your ability to have
I
children?
think that's a topic, Tolan, that maybe needs a little point of a drill down, because you're right. I think, especially for African American women or women of minority, oftentimes the first thing that some women may encounter is, we'll get a hysterectomy, right? For
Hmm.
me, that was the first thing my doctor said to me. You're 36, you're not married, you don't have any kids, you have this huge fibroid that's the size of a cantaloupe, right? Like, you just need to get a hysterectomy. And I was like, whoa, I'm a young woman. Like that's not going to be the first option we're going to take. We're going to, explore other things. And I also say, I'll lean to say that freezing eggs in vitro is a sense of a privilege. And I
Hmm.
say that because
Hmm.
there is a financial cost here.
Hmm.
And there is
Hmm.
a sense of having adequate health care to do that, and adequate doctors to go
Hmm.
to help you. And so, in some sense, it still feels like a privilege as well.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Let's talk about that cost. And I love the fact that you point out that it is a privilege.
Yes.
Like it,
Mm-hmm.
it absolutely is not financially accessible to every woman.
Mm-hmm.
And so I definitely appreciate that call out. My research suggests that a session can cost anywhere from ten to
Mm-hmm.
$20,000
Mm-hmm.
for a session, and you might
Yeah.
need multiple
Mm-hmm.
cycles of
Right.
this to successfully retrieve the number of eggs required. And so I won't go into
Mm-hmm.
those details now. Just want to point out that it is costly, and you guys can share, your experience with that cost in a moment. But I would love to just hear about how you approached the procedure, what that was like for you, and what is this procedure?
Yeah, I can go ahead on that. So, yes, the privilege piece, and we can, again, if we go into that, very privileged. I have very good health insurance, and I paid about $2,000 total for everything, which is a big deal, because the medications alone were like 7 grand. That's the most like expensive
Wow.
part, are the hormones. And because I had PCOS, I had to go like a little bit longer on the more hormones. So, and then my estrogen shot up, which is another thing. And so basically I had to go longer. So I had to get another set of medications.
Wow.
So you think about that. I think I paid 100 and something for the first, like with my copay. And I remember being on the phone and I was like, how much? And she's like, whatever. She said 170 something. And I was like, really? She's like, is that too much? I said, no, take my money real quick before y'all change your mind. But yeah, the process is interesting. Again, I think it's unique depending on what issues you may have as a woman, if you are coming in with any issues. But they always do the initial blood work, they do an ultrasound to kind of see what your baseline is, especially if you have cysts on your ovaries, because they show up and they look like the little follicles. So, that you kind of started it like that, do that baseline, and then you basically get medications and you inject yourself at multiple times a day, depending, and they have like a whole regimen. Um, and then you have to go in every day, basically, for that whole regimen to get blood work because they have to check your levels. So when a woman has her period, it's like once a month, like an egg matures or whatever. Well, they're basically trying to make multiple follicles grow to a certain size, and then so they can retrieve as many eggs as possible. But they also don't want you to ovulate, so they want to keep them in there. So then it's like a set of drugs to make them grow, but then another set to make sure that you don't ovulate, so they can keep the eggs in there to extract them. And so it's a interesting, they kind of glamorize it sometimes on TV. So I remember forewarning all of my colleagues that I was getting this procedure done because they pump you so much full of hormones that they say women are crazy on the cycle. But I was apparently not. I was fine. So, but yeah, so it's at least a 2 week cycle, and it could be more depending. So it is an interesting, very intense process.
I agree, Adrienne. I think I'll talk about that procedure for me as well, or that process. So you're right. You go in to your doctor, you get some initial blood work done. Really, they want to see, and I don't have the appropriate terms with me, but I'll get them as we navigate this discussion. But they want to understand your how many eggs you have in your reserve. They want to understand your blood levels. I believe it's AMH is one, and there's another. And so that way, the doctor will be able to understand how much medicine you need, at what quantity, what's the frequency, etc. So she'll give you a calendar. So you'll get an IVF calendar. And so my calendar was about 2.5 weeks. Again, it's tailored to you and unique to you. It will be dependent on the results of your blood. So for me, because my egg reserve was low, they wanted to give me more hormones through the cycle so I could produce the most eggs possible. And so when I started the process, I also was going through just some other life factors. I was purchasing a home. I was, one of the biggest life events you could have, one of the few, one of the biggest life events. There's other things as well. I was also starting a new job. And so the home I was purchasing was an hour away from my home that I lived in at the time. And so I was going back and forth. Additionally, because I wanted a black doctor, at that point I lived in Columbus, Georgia. So I was driving to Atlanta, Georgia, which is about 90 minutes away from Columbus, Georgia. And so as you navigate your treatment calendar, the more frequent you're going to have to go to the doctor. And so like Adrianne mentioned, I had to give myself shots every day. And so it was upwards of two shots in the evening. You had to abstain from sexual activity because you want to be the healthiest you could be. I didn't drink when I was on the medicine, of course. I did limited caffeine intake. And as you navigate, you're going to have to go to the doctor more frequently because they want to begin to measure your follicles. And then they'll know when to retrieve them. But I would say, as I navigated the process, in hindsight, if I could do it again, I likely would have took time off work. And I say that because the medicine is tricking your body as if you are pregnant, right? Mm-hmm. Except for you're not carrying. And so week 1 for me was probably a little status quo. Week 2, I became really emotional. I also became very, I would say, bloated, and I felt full. I was extremely tired, and one of my sorority sisters, again, who had been through it before, she encouraged me. She said, do things during that period of time that make you happy. So I would do things like go to Cold Stone because I love Cold Stone ice cream. I would go get ice cream and I would go to sleep, and it was the best sleep in the world, by the way. Like, I don't know why, but it was the best sleep in the world. I would sleep at 7 p.m. And you have to take this medicine at the same time every day. So you got to also remember during your treatment calendar, you got to kind of plan that out. You may not be able to do dinner, right? Or if you do, you have to go in the bathroom and take your shot. So if my shot time was at 7:30, no matter where I was, I had to do that. And oh, by the way, some of the medicines that you take have to be refrigerated. It has to be at a certain temperature. And frankly, Adrianne, I don't know how you felt, but I felt bloated. I felt heavy. I wore baggy clothing. I just felt uncomfortable the closer I got to retrieval because my follicles continued to grow.
Yes, because your ovaries grow.
Yeah.
So instead of like one follicle, when you ovulate, sometimes you get a little like cramping or like you feel. So imagine all of like getting multiple follicles to grow, and they're trying to get as many eggs as possible. So I'm not sure, Sophia, about your journey. I know my doctor was saying that, a lot of women start, even though there is a group I think that starts younger, a lot of women wait. So when you're, 40, close to 40 or a little over, you have less eggs and the quality goes down. So he was saying that, when I did it was good, but he ended up getting 48 eggs, but only 36, well, I don't want to say only 36 were viable. And he was like, this is about 3 to 4 times the amount is like the average woman because you did it, young enough. So I was like, no wonder I felt like crap because 36, because each follicle has 1 egg. So it's like, woof, it was very uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I think that's such a blessing, Adrianne, because for me again, I had quantity was my issue, and although they saw maybe as they were doing ultrasounds, vaginal ultrasounds, again every day as you're on your cycle, I think maybe they seen 10 or 11, but on the egg retrieval day, they got 3, and so another thing we could talk about is fertility math. Fertility math is not 1 + 1 = 2. And so, they like for women, especially at that age that I was, which was 36, to have at minimum 10 stored eggs. And for a minute, I had PTSD and I cried. I cried after the surgery because she said I had 3 and I thought it was the end of the world. And I said, you know what? I had 3, but all 3 were great. And so I have a quantity problem and maybe not a quality. And so I was just grateful to have the 3, that the 3 were viable. But they also recommended that I would go through several other iterations of this. And I couldn't bear to even think about it at that time. So that's another Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's another privilege it's important to talk about is me having 36 eggs. And because not, it's also different because not all of them are going to survive thawing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So again, it is like that, like my chances would be higher because I have so many. Whereas yes, if you have less, because it is the process, you can lose a quarter of them in thawing and then it doesn't, it's such a stressful and
Yeah.
I think scary process for women.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And I want to maybe reemphasize something you said about the thawing process, right? So we always hear, for me, I always hear about the freezing process and how the success rate, for that tends to be high. But I don't think often enough, and maybe it is happening and I'm just not privy because I haven't gone through the process, that people are talking about the thawing and the IVF process that happens when you actually want to go and fertilize the egg, and how challenging that is. It feels like we're promising women that they're going to have these viable options in 10 more years from now, but that's not necessarily the case because, to your point, Adrianne, not every egg will survive the thawing process. Do the
Mhm.
doctors go into a lot of detail with you about these risks and what was that conversation like for you?
Yeah, I think he went in, and it's funny because obviously it's been like 6 years now, so I don't really remember everything. But yeah, I do. He was very thorough. He was actually a really, really good doctor. But I think also just doing some of my own research because the other part that isn't also talked about is, and I don't have the medical resources at the top of my head, but it is better to freeze an embryo than an egg.
Hmm.
So it's also different when you're just freezing your own egg versus if you and your partner decide to, like folks maybe who are cancer patients, them and their partners have frozen eggs before because they were going through treatment or whatever. So it is a difference too, when you are freezing them as an embryo versus just the egg. I mean, they're still like the embryo may not survive the thawing either. I don't really quite understand it, but that was kind of some of the stuff that I looked into. But yeah, my doctor was pretty thorough. I kind of felt like I wasn't going in blind, or I was pretty confident about my decision. I understood the risk.
Yeah, I think my doctor was pretty thorough as well. And she was pretty honest with me, given where my hormones were, that I may need it to go through several cycles to store enough eggs. And so she was clear to say, yeah, while you have these 3 on eggs, of which you pay for monthly, you pay a storage fee for that.
Hmm.
The doctor still today doesn't feel that that's adequate for a woman my
Hmm.
age and for a woman that has such a low egg reserve. And
Hmm.
so just recently, my fertility doctor and I were talking about either you're going to get serious about, getting pregnant, or you're going to go through another cycle. And so today I do know that I have a risk that if I wanted to fertilize the egg with my partner's sperm, that, we have a chance of, it's very low with the quantity of eggs that I have stored. So they are pretty honest with you.
Yeah, that's good to hear because I'm always worried that doctors are painting a picture that might not be realistic in hopes of just exploiting people, right? Getting your money. This is big business at the end of the day. You talked about the cost of doing a cycle of this, and but then there's that storage cost also that you just mentioned. And I didn't even realize that it was a monthly storage cost associated with this. And so, wow.
So not only is there a cost to go through the original procedure, at least the first half, which is just preserving, you
Hmm.
also have to pay to keep them preserved. And I'll also say that I've also thought about the scary things to say, like where are they? Like, can you show me them? Like, how do I know? Like, so those crazy things go through my head as well. How do I know that those are mine? Like, how do I know you really have them? Right? But yeah.
And so yeah, there is, and I've heard horror stories. I remember, I don't know if it was during COVID, but a lab. Something happened, somebody accidentally did something, and all the eggs were destroyed because the freezer didn't work. So all these families who paid thousands of dollars, and so yeah, you do. You're like, how do I know that this is right, or how do I know something crazy can't happen? Because essentially you're paying for it, but these people have all the control.
Yeah, that's crazy. I can't even begin to imagine how those people felt when they heard the news. So, is there a time frame? Like, can you store your eggs indefinitely? Is it okay? So, yeah,
You can.
forever.
Yeah,
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 yeah. Yeah, whatever the eggs were at the time that you froze
that's
them,
right.
they keep all of that. So that's another reason why they encourage you to do it like before 35, because they say, the quality goes down, right? So, whatever quality my eggs were when I froze them is the quality that they'll be when they're thawed out. So I have 35-year-old eggs versus if I was to do it at 40, I would have 40-year-old eggs.
That's
So
right.
that they don't age anymore, which is also another benefit. But again, nobody tells us these things.
Exactly.
So you don't know that.
Yeah. And that's a little, I oftentimes don't regret because oftentimes things work out in life the way it just should. But in hindsight, at 27, when I initially was on the discovery path because of my mom enlightening me, I should have done it. But I was fearful at 27 at the thought of giving my own self a shot. And so it's interesting. If we talk about the mindset of a 27-year-old woman versus a 37-year-old woman or a 35-year-old woman, oftentimes for me, I'll just speak about me. I thought I had time. And what I know today is time was just not on our fertility math side. Again, fertility math is different than regular math. It just wasn't on my side. And so as a 27-year-old woman, not being educated, not really just taking it serious, I would have froze at that time. And frankly, I would freeze at 21. I would freeze at 20. And I've even heard of mothers gifting their young daughters this as a gift because people are aware of fertility math. And so I have 36-year-old eggs where I should have done it at 27. And that is something that women need to know as well. So we continue to put it off. Oh, I'll meet someone, or I'm really not thinking about a baby right now. I want to focus on my career, right? And I think growing up, I was told, you got time. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
just go to school, go get a career. Don't worry about a man. I wasn't intentional. I wasn't really thoughtful in those areas. And so a little part of me does regret, but I'm still happy that I had the journey. So I encourage young women very, very earlier on, if you could do it, to freeze your eggs very earlier on and just save them.
Mm-hmm.
There's no harm in doing so, of course, under the advice of your medical provider.
Well, the harm might be the cost of doing so.
Yes, that's
Right,
fair.
because you're not as put
Yes,
together. You know what I mean? At
yes,
21,
yeah,
25, even, like, I couldn't even imagine. There's no way I could have afforded that.
yeah.
And it's not like you have a payment plan.
There's no
Right.
You
payment
have to
plan.
pay for it all up front. Like, there's
Yeah,
no payment plan,
yeah.
bill me later. So,
And the lack of education that at least existed in my family. So my grandmother frowned upon me a bit for doing so, right? Because she just couldn't fathom and understand why. And so oftentimes very earlier on, because you have limitations in money and you may have to rely on your family members because they're not either educated on it or they will steer you away. My family was so confused. They were like, why would you
mhm,
do that? Just let God do his
right.
thing, right? And it was like it's not about letting God do his thing or not, but if I have this option, I
Hmm.
should explore it.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Yeah. Adding religion is a whole other thing.
Yeah,
I
that's what I
don't
was gonna
come from a
say.
really religious family, so it wasn't that. But yeah, right. Everybody's like, if it's meant to be, gotta
that's
mean
right.
it. But I'm also, then I kind of think about that with mental health too. Like, but God also allowed these doctors to be created so that it can help. So, you know
Yeah,
what I mean? Like, I feel like I have a different thought about that. But yeah, I think the other thing is people don't understand. They're like, wait, so you're not going to have a kid like the regular way? And I'm like, no, this doesn't mean that I'm not going to have a kid the regular way.
that's right.
And I think, again, like Sophia speaking to like your numbers being lower, like, no, I still could do it the regular way. because they didn't take all my eggs. It's just one cycle. But yeah, I think it is a weird stigma to it. And I never really heard about it when I was in my 20s. And I think the other piece that is my struggle, when we get into talking about my choice to not renew, is that for donating eggs, for one, people pay 6 to 12,000 per eggs. And as far as I know, I don't know if that's covered under insurance. But if you were to like want to donate to like an agency, they don't take eggs past like 26. So I can't even donate my eggs because they said my eggs are too old, which is
That's
also crazy.
interesting.
Yes.
Let's go there because I think that that's fascinating that you have made a decision to not renew. So you're making a decision to not keep your eggs. Tell us a bit about that decision. Like what prompted it and how did you experience that?
Hmm. Yeah. So another reason why I froze my eggs, one, I was single, and then I ended up getting into this PhD program, and I still wasn't sure if I was going, but I was like, I'm not going to have a kid during a PhD. So it was to preserve the quality because I knew when I finished I would be 39, and I wasn't sure if I would have a relationship. And at that time, I was dead set on just getting a donor. Like that was in my brain. And seeing people have kids older, it was always like, I can do this, I'll be fine. And um, my doctorate took so much out of me. Going at 35 was a lot. I was not a spring chicken. And I was probably like almost 10 years older than some of my classmates who came straight through. So they were still in their 20s, and it's just the energy level was different, and a lot of things happened. COVID happened, and just dating life sucked. And so when I was done, I was just like, I'm tired. And I had another level of like a moral conflict because I also have a very close relationship with my dad, like grew up a daddy's girl. And I was like, I don't know if I want my kid not to have a dad. Even though they're single mom, people are like, oh, they're single moms. I'm not against a single mom. I'm not against people doing that. And everyone's like, oh, well, you have a good support system. And I I feel really guilty for saying this, but I don't have a lot of males in my life that would be a positive role model or someone I would necessarily have around my kid. That's no just. I have some maybe distant cousins, but nobody that I'm like super close to that are close enough to me to where they would be close to my kid. I have some guy friends, but again, everybody was so spread out. So for me, it was like I don't actually have the same level of support as maybe as what I thought initially. Um, so now being 40, I just realized for me, I don't want to be doing this on my own at 40. If I met someone today and something happened and I got pregnant, I would be elated, it would be fine. But I really had to have a reckoning with myself about what I really wanted and what I thought was be fair to a kid. And so
Yeah.
for me, it just, with a lot of conversations, a lot of therapy, it was just like, okay, this just may not be meant to be, and it's okay. Because for years, I was devastated. I cried. You know, even freezing my eggs, it was just like, this has to work. I have to have a kid. And now, so much in my life has changed that I'm also just like, I don't want to do it alone anymore. And everybody says you're not alone, but at the end of the day, like, even with support, like, you're still the parent. You know what I mean?
You're
Like, you
alone.
still have to make sacrifices. Um, Tavon, like, I know you travel a lot for work.
Yeah.
And I travel too to conferences and stuff. And I'm like, I don't have a village next to me to babysit my kid.
Mm-mm.
So, how would I navigate that without, I just don't think I can do this. But there is a grief to it. And the
Yeah.
fact that I can't donate them. Um, and how many Black women are donating eggs? right? Because you also have to think about women who want kids and maybe can't use their own eggs.
Yeah.
How many black women, how many people can get an egg from a black woman? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that's another added layer of the sadness. I'm sad that nobody's going to get a chance to use these, and there's so many women that probably could and can't, and I just want to donate them. Like, I don't even need you to pay for them. Like,
Yeah.
but I can't.
Is there a way to do that on a private, like a private donation versus the normal, whatever donation process is?
I haven't been able to find anybody. That was
Mm.
one thing that I'm considering. I tried to, I gotta look into more of these Facebook groups a colleague of mine told me about, but I think that that would be the only way I could donate them. But
Yeah.
also, I don't know how that works with doctors. Like, the
Mm.
doctors may be like, these eggs are too old. We don't feel comfortable or liable to use them knowing, whatever the circumstances. So I don't even know what that looks like.
Yeah, it's interesting because egg freezing itself, I guess, wasn't even recognized as a real procedure or anything other than experimental until 2012. So I'm sure that the regulations aren't clear on donation because we're just now understanding more and more about what it means to be successful in this space. So I'd be curious if anybody's out there who's listening who has any answers, drop it in the comments. Let us know.
Hmm.
But Adrian, it's brave for you to share that because I'm sure it came with some grief and some mourning of that process. And I recall you posting something on Facebook, in
Hmm.
fact, and I'm like, girl, look at me.
Hmm.
I wasn't expecting nobody's baby.
Right.
And so it can happen naturally. And I respect that you don't want to do this alone because it is
Hmm.
incredibly difficult,
Hmm.
contrary to popular belief.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I feel like black women often feel like we have to wear this Superman cape and we can do it all by ourselves and we don't need these
Hmm.
other people. And I feel like it's time to take the cape off, honey. I'm not that girl. Like I need help.
Hmm.
And I think that
Hmm.
that's good and it's fair and it's healthy. And I love the fact
Hmm.
that you said through therapy, you
Hmm.
had a lot of tough conversations with yourself and with your therapist about this to come to the conclusion. And so it wasn't this isolation, of
Hmm.
introspection that happens that can
Hmm.
sometimes really magnify guilt and this feeling of holding on and not being able to release. So I'm super
Hmm.
proud of you, for your process and for sharing your story, for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you. Think it is difficult, Yeah, I got a lot of folks, and I didn't mean it that way. I think part of it was also posting it to get maybe see if like somebody knew something about what I could do with them. But it was interesting because I got a lot of folks messaging me privately or posting like so sad, and I'm like, no, that's wasn't the point. Like I wasn't looking for sympathy. It was just more or less like I usually share what I share because of like my mental health and because I want to be real. We all know that social media is not real.
Yeah.
People post themselves looking beautiful and having all the things, and I think because of just what I see as a therapist, I'm like practicing vulnerability and want people to see that like people go through real things. Like I may be a doctor and everybody thinks, "Oh, your life is so perfect." And it's like, "No, it's not." Like we all have issues and that's okay.
Yeah.
Um but no, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't know how you do it. I mean, I do know how you do it from what I know of you, but also like it's hard. Being a parent with a partner full time is hard.
Yeah.
So,
It is
um
incredibly hard. I'm over here off and on camera now because my kid got me sick. So I
yep.
apologize. It sounds terrible. I look horrible, but we're here, and I
Yeah,
think
that's
it's
a
important because
Yeah.
it's also, it feeds me, it motivates me, it keeps me in the mindset of knowing that like these conversations heal. They're
Mhm.
healing. They're cathartic. People need to hear it, and even though it's not my journey and my story, it still heals me to know that there are other Black women out there whose journeys are just as beautiful, even if the ending is not the same. The journey itself is amazing. It's a blessing.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Sophia,
mm,
I know that you have, been on this journey for a bit of a shorter period of time with your egg
Mhm.
retrieval and not going the way you had hoped, per se, with the number of viable eggs. Where are you at in your process, and what are you contemplating as next steps?
Yeah, this is such a topic that I continue to pray over because it causes me anxiety and just gives me stress, especially when I do feel a sense of like fear coming from my doctor. And it's not so much as fear. Like, I can't tell when they speak to me, do you know something that you're not educating me on? Like, why are you pushing me so hard to go through another egg freezing cycle because I have three? Like, are you not just speaking plain? Like, just speak plain English. Or do I need to do it or not? And then a part of me say, so I guess I'm torn. I know I still want to keep my eggs preserved today. I don't want to particularly unthaw them and try to fertilize them because I want to try the old fashioned way. But I also want to be married when having a kid. And so I feel like I'm bumping up against time and I feel like time is running out. Although I know that's probably not a reality, but that's how I feel. And oh, by the way, I froze or preserved eggs in 2023. I believe it was October. And then I had a major fibroid surgery in November. So I had a robotic myomectomy. So after you do something that major, you have to, about 3 to 6 months, you have to go back and just make sure that your tubes, your fallopian tubes and everything is clear. And so I went back. I had to have two different procedures to determine, or two different tests rather, to determine the viability of my tubes, to make sure everything was still open. Well, they say that one of my tubes are closed. And so, when you think about where am I on my journey, I'm at a place where I'm scared. I'm at a place where I don't know what to do. I'm at a place where the doctor said she had this sense of urgency that I didn't understand, that I didn't have in my own life. So I'm at a place where I'm doing two things. I'm toying between going to freeze more eggs. I am trying to get pregnant, and then I'm toying between, do I go get my partner's sperm tested? Because I'm like, what if it's not me, right? What if it's
Yes.
someone else? Am I not having
Yes.
enough sex? Like, maybe I'm not, but it's all those things. So all of those feelings are happening for me, and I don't know how to process them, if I'm honest.
That's gotta be hard. I mean, again, thinking about it from also just the therapy standpoint and the experiences I've had with um, colleagues who's women who just feel like they're inadequate. I feel like, you know, why not get him tested just so you have the picture, you know what I mean? Because you could be sitting there wondering this whole time, and I think that's another part of like the process is you wondering
Hmm.
and beating yourself up, and
Yeah.
it's a um it's just really hard
Yeah.
mentally, emotionally, physically
Yeah.
on your body.
Hmm.
You know, I remember reading Gabrielle Union's book and her talking about it, and I don't even know. Like, I'm trying not to get emotional thinking about listening to you, Sophia, because it is so um,
Yeah.
emotional.
Hmm. Yep.
It is emotional, and
Yep.
it is, mentally draining. It's
Yes.
exhausting.
Yes.
I say absolutely if he's willing to get him tested as well, because you call him your partner. I love the word partner because it means we're in it together. And that to me suggests that it's not one sided. Like,
Yeah.
we are truly walking this journey as partners, and that means it's your turn, you're up,
Yeah.
right? I need
Yeah.
your support, and part of that is understanding our full reproductive picture. It's
Yep.
not just mine. It takes two to tangle, right?
Yep.
And so if he was open to doing that sooner rather than later,
Yeah.
because I think it also eliminates a point of stress where you're not sure,
Yeah.
and you're taking a bit of that off of you by allowing him to also carry part of this.
Yeah.
I don't want to call it a burden, but just carrying part of this process,
It's a
right?
burden.
Yeah.
It
It's a
feels
Yeah.
like
burden.
that, right? It's
Absolutely.
heavy. It's
Yeah.
heavy.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you said something else too, I think, that people also don't talk about is the sex part.
Yeah.
Like, you know, people are afraid to talk about sex, but like sex with your partner is supposed to be enjoyable. Like, you're
That's right.
supposed to not be seeing it as a job. And so the other part is, you know, like you joked and said, maybe I'm not having enough sex, but like not only just that, but like when you're having sex, are you enjoying that moment with your partner, or are you thinking like, I gotta get pregnant, I gotta do this, like I gotta make sure, thinking all the superstitious stuff, let me get on top, let me put my legs up, is his sperm working? Like it takes away from all the fun of the sex with, and it's supposed to be a moment with you and your partner where you're creating life, right?
Yeah.
And it takes away from that part too, which adds more stress, and stress is also a huge indicator, like it's a huge issue. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
whew, so many things.
So many things. And I've recently thought about acupuncture. You hear a lot of women on their fertility journey doing acupuncture, and I want to be clear to say, because my family and people would say, well, what's wrong with you? And there's nothing particularly wrong with me. Like, and
Right.
so when you tell people you preserved eggs, they think there's something wrong with you. And I
Mm-hmm.
say, wait, there's nothing wrong with me. I just never in my 37 years truly attempted to get pregnant. I've been on
Mm-hmm.
birth control out from
Right.
17 to 30.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've never had a space in my life where that was the goal. And so I tell people, wait, there's nothing wrong with me. I want to be clear. Like I've never been pregnant before, but I've never ever tried. I've always been on birth control, or I always used a condom for protection. Um, and so that's also a stigma that women get put on themselves, that something is wrong with you. You're
Yeah.
not adequate enough, or you must have a problem. And there's no problem.
Yeah,
I don't
and
know
I
how,
will say
yeah.
that just to piggyback on that because I think it's such an important
Yes.
point. Like they call it the miracle of life for a reason because conception has to happen at a very specific, like things have to line up just right, and that's because people are ignorant about the reproductive process in general,
Yes.
that they don't understand that if it ain't the right time in the right window on the right day, it's just not gonna happen. That's not the way biology works. And so it's not even that there's nothing wrong with you. It is that we're so not educated
Yeah.
as
Not at
a
Yeah.
all.
people about the process that we don't realize that, honey, that thing had to line up just right for me. That is how the fertility math works. And the math don't math on every day.
Yeah.
And so I think it's so critical that people just educate themselves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with you. I've heard the same thing because I never, had never been pregnant, and
Yeah.
yeah, I've had people
Yeah.
say some pretty rude,
Yeah. And if we
ridiculous
talk
things.
about that in the black family, is that, I mean, I hear, and I even hear from my father, which is very discouraging. Oh, you too old. People will tell me, oh, your eggs is fried, or you're not gonna have any kids if you haven't had them by now. And years ago, it would have bothered me, but now I just shut it out because I'm like, you're ignorant. Yeah, I'm not even gonna go back and forth with you. But people say some very nasty things to you,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not okay. And we should be mindful about what we say to people.
Yes. Yes, we should stop. I
Yeah.
say that all the time. Don't ask people anymore because, again, it's this idea of, oh my gosh, I could go off on a tangent of so many things. I feel like we might need to have a second follow up
Yeah.
episode with adding in the social political climate. And I
Yes.
say that to say that, there's all of these issues surrounding abortion, which is another topic, but it's the sad part is that people are always like, you just don't want kids. Like, so there's this negative connotation of like, if you don't want kids, then you're not a woman or you're not woman enough. But then also it's this idea of you don't know how many times people have tried to maybe have kids or how many women have
Yeah.
had miscarriages. I have a client who's had 3 miscarriages
Yes.
and it's devastated her every time. And so, it's this idea of people saying these things, and like, you don't know someone's circumstance. You know what I mean? But because of societal norms and what's always been, people are like, oh, you don't want kids? Why don't you have kids? And it's like, it may not be because I don't want kids or never
Yep.
wanted kids. It may just be the circumstances, and people they don't ever take that into consideration
It's so
regarding that.
true. I think that's a whole topic by itself that we definitely need to cover because there's so much stigma around not having kids and what that means about you as a woman versus men, the society that we live in, the fact that people are having a hard time. They call it the mating gap, finding their person. to even have kids with. And having kids is dangerous. Childbirth is dangerous.
Yep.
And so when you even say things like that, I feel like it just continues to show me that like we don't really have the education around what it means to give birth, to get pregnant, any of that. And so we don't know how to address or have those conversations with people in an authentic way that doesn't create this anxiety and the stigma for women who have not had children for whatever reason, even if it's your personal choice, because guess what? You don't have to.
Right.
Before I had a kid, if you would have asked me, I'd be like, no, I'm good. First of all, I don't need them problems. Then not because I don't have a nurturing place and I didn't want to be a mother at some point in my life, but I had more than that and I moved past that and that wasn't what I envisioned my future to be anymore. And so why are you asking me this? How's that going for you?
Yeah, that's right.
How's
Yeah.
that husband and kid thing going for you? Let's talk about that for a minute.
Right.
Let's switch it. Let's turn the tables.
Right. Yeah.
It's fair game now. You're asking me. I'm asking you. Well, how's marriage? How's that marriage?
Right.
And especially
Yep.
during
Because it
this
ain't all.
time where it's holiday time, you're gathering with family and friends,
Yeah.
and that is oftentimes for women always the topic.
Oh
Always,
yeah.
at least for me
Yeah.
and my family, always the topic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's just another topic of wholeness and what that means
Yeah.
as a woman, and worthiness and what that means as a woman, and how sometimes our worth and our wholeness we tied to these things that society tells us makes us that. What makes you a woman and makes you whole as children. What makes you worthy and makes you great as a husband, right? That's an indication of who you are as a woman, and I think we've got to shatter some of those myths and preconceptions. So I don't want to take us too far off of the egg freezing journey. I know that we've been on here for a minute, and so we definitely may have to do a part two, because I found this educational. I do have maybe one more question, and that is maybe it's a two-part question. The first is, what advice would you give other women who are considering this process? And then what one thing do you wish you had known or would have done different if you could do it over again?
Yeah, I'll go. I think my advice is no matter where you are, what age you are, if that's still something you desire, is to go to the appropriate, go to a fertility specialist, go to your OB, get educated on at least where you stand in your hormone levels, where you stand in your fertility journey. That's where I think you should start. I also think that if you're in a place where, do it younger, for women that just don't know where they are on their fertility journey, just don't know if that's something that they want. I say if you have the means, if you have the privilege we've been talking about today, I say do it. So that's my piece of advice. I think what I know now, what would I have done different? During the time of preserving my eggs, I would have preserved like my mental during that time. I would have just probably taken off work, got in a space where I could just, I don't want to say nest, but to an extent be comfortable and nest and enjoy the 2.5 week journey because it goes by so fast. I would have done acupuncture. I would have done maybe just more things for myself to feel comfortable. And I just would have done it earlier. I would have done it earlier at 27 when I initially started, if I could go back. So that's my piece of advice, and that's what I would have done differently.
Yeah. Yeah. I probably would have did it a little younger too. If I would have known what my insurance benefits were at the time, I would have did it as soon as I started this new job, because it's a privilege and because, you know, I had the good coverage. So I definitely would have probably did it earlier. I think also it's important to know, yes, needles can be scary.
Yeah.
I know people get really nervous. I was lucky enough to where I was fine. It was, and now I'm like an old pro. I never really was bothered by needles like that, but the thought of like poking myself was scary. But also like it wasn't as bad as what I thought it would be. So, you know, either have someone that you trust or that's not afraid. I think that's another thing. I can't think of anything really like that I learned or that what I would do different. I think, how it worked out is how it worked out. I know that maybe I would have gotten a donor sooner if I did it earlier, instead of waiting. But I think I still had this hope that I would have a partner. So, yeah, I would say that would be.
So,
Yeah, I love that. I want to end on a couple of notes, and the first is it takes a lot of courage. I know I said this before, and how appreciative I am for both of you being so open and telling your stories. It takes a lot of courage to do this, so thank you for showing up and doing this for people. It's a story that needs to be heard, so I appreciate that. The second is, like, I continue to think about some themes that kind of occurred throughout this conversation, is themes that occurred throughout my pregnancy, and that's the need for support. Whether that is your partner that you're going through this with and having conversations with, and then being able to help carry some of the load of these decisions and these procedures and what you need to protect yourself mentally as you're going through that process, whether it is, your friend groups or your parents even, and those folks who can just be accepting and open to hearing whatever it is you're going through and not putting a lot of pressure on you one way or another from a decision perspective. I think that support is so critical. And even the support of a therapist, right? Of, I know that I need to talk through this with someone, recognizing that and reaching out and doing that work, because I think that is, to me, invaluable. Like, I don't even know how to quantify what just therapy can do for you. And so I love that you shared your story, but I love that those key themes continue to come through every episode for me, because I keep emphasizing to people that support is critical. So thank you for being a part of my support team always, but also thank you for being here. I have a million more questions. I am sure there are going to be questions coming in as we start to post this content. And so I might have you ladies back. Just be prepared.
absolutely.
Listen,
Prepared.
and my therapist lens, I'm always like, what do we want to talk about? Because I think in the mental health world, and as Black women, that's been another passion of mine, and I'm going to be advertising more as working with Black women, because that strong Black women narrative, and how it is, y'all, it is so deeply embedded in the community. You don't actually have to be this person, but it is so deeply embedded, and it just gets passed on. So, if we ever want to talk about that false narrative.
Absolutely. Sign me up for some one-on-one sessions, 'cause it's I believe that we have to let go of that shield to take off the cape, and I have an awareness of that. And yet it is so hard when everyone sees you as the person to go to, and everyone sees you as the person who has it together, and they're expecting you to show up a certain way. It almost the cape starts to suffocate you. Like, it's almost impossible to untie the knot. And so I think there's a lot of working through that we have to do collectively and individually to start allowing ourselves to be different, to show up different, and to not be that person day in and day out. So I definitely want to make space for that conversation, and honey, sign me up for the sessions.
I'm telling you.
So, okay, ladies, well, I am going to end with a sincere thank you again for being here. I loved hearing your story and learning from you, and I cannot wait again to get this episode out there to the world so that others can hear from you. And in the meantime, we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe.